Hello there, boys and girls, and welcome back to Mind the Force, a nerdy podcast about Star Wars and mental health. I'm your host, Christine McPartlin. Now, we find ourselves here at the beginning of the end, or the end of the end, depending on how you look at it, for our good friend Anakin Skywalker. I welcome you with a heavy heart to episode 6, The Beginning of the Fall, for our final condition assessment for Anakin in his darkest days, before we bid him farewell and say hello to our new chum, Darth Vader. I will confirm now that Vader will have a whole separate trilogy arc at a later time, as I am of the camp who feels Vader is a different character than Anakin, and I look forward to parsing that out with you one day. I will admit that it's a bit bittersweet to bring this trilogy arc to a close. After spending so many weeks poring over Anakin's journey in great detail and the tragedy of it all, it'll be interesting to put him down and pick up other characters. And he may or may not be a supporting character in their story, but it is a big galaxy with plenty of space for everyone, so we will carry on. But we will always hold a special place in our hearts for the doomed chosen one, who we have all come to know and love, no matter how many people he force chokes along the way. This episode, I had the pleasure to speak with psychotherapist Elisa Paymore and get her thoughts on a few big themes I thought were important to get into at this time in Anakin's life. There's the influence and culpability of Anakin, Palpatine, and the Jedi in Anakin's fall to the dark side and all the chaos that comes along with it, as well as looking at how Anakin deals with loss throughout his life. It's probably one of my favorite conversations on the pod so far, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. But before we dive deep into Anakin's final days, our usual orders of business. To follow this journey with me, please check out the sensational mindtheforce.com for pod and guest info, and follow Mind the Force on Instagram and Facebook for fun additional content and announcements. And to stay up to date on the latest episodes, please follow, subscribe, and share on all your favorite streaming platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, etc., etc. And some advice, don't be lame. Shoot us 5 stars. You know you want to. And for all big Star Wars thoughts, questions, and feelings, send me an email at mindtheforcepodcast@gmail.com. And last, but certainly never least, your friendly content spoiler warning. Mind the Force podcast is a retrospective on Star Wars characters across all Star Wars content. All films, TV shows, novels, comic books, and video games are up for discussion. If you don't want some aspect of currently released Star Wars content to be spoiled, you know the drill. I turn around now. Now, do we have all engines at the ready? Seatbelts fastened? Mirrors checked? Phones connected via Bluetooth? Good, good. All systems go, go, go! Hello. I am so excited to welcome Elisa Paymer to the show. How are you, Lisa?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very well. I'm very excited to have you on. You have a very interesting background that I think everyone will enjoy. Elisa is a psychotherapist living in New York City. She works with musicians, artists, and other creatives and performers struggling to find satisfaction in their careers and personal lives, as well as executives and professionals who are navigating personal and workplace pressures. Having transitioned to the mental health field after 30 years as a musician and music industry executive, Elisa understands how the professional environment can impact mental health. She provides a space where you can embrace vulnerability and improve communication skills, deal with imposter syndrome, manage anxiety and depression, achieve career satisfaction, and navigate the unique pressures of the entertainment industry. That is extremely cool, Lisa.
Thank you.
I love that. What an interesting marriage of fields.
Yeah, yeah, it really combines my, you know, big interests of the entertainment industry and creative work with psychotherapy and mental health.
I love that. I love that. Um, because mental health looks so different across different industries. And the pressures, and I can imagine as technology changes and society changes, um, that people need to change along with it.
Absolutely. And I think the entertainment industry is a field where mental health was never really a priority. And a lot of people in and outside the industry never really thought of it as having particular aspects that were challenging to healthy mental states. So I think that's starting to change, and people are realizing that being mentally healthy in the entertainment business is extremely important.
Right? I can imagine there was a lot of that feeling of it's so cool to be in the entertainment industry and be in music or film or TV or whatever it was that you should just be grateful to be here. Aren't you just so
Absolutely.
happy because your career is so cool?
Yeah. What are you complaining about?
Right? Like
Uh,
your life is wonderful.
yeah,
especially in New York City. Aren't we all just grateful to be here?
of course, because it's so easy to live here.
Right? It's so easy and everyone's so I don't know if I use the word chipper to describe New Yorkers.
Yeah, yeah, it comes with a lot of challenges, and it's really helpful to have those challenges acknowledged.
Yeah, I think that's what we're all looking for in the human experience is to be seen.
Absolutely, seen and understood, and feel compassion.
Mm, very well put. Very well put. I'm very excited to have you on today to discuss the tragic fall of Mr. Anakin Skywalker.
Yes, yes, the tragic fall.
Yes, it is. It's been a long time coming, unfortunately, for young Anakin. Um, I always start out and ask, are you a Star Wars fan?
I am, and at the risk of acknowledging my advanced age, I've actually saw the original movies when they came out.
Ah, marvelous. That is, what I always think about those big events in the zeitgeist of just being there in that moment and probably not knowing what a big thing it was at the time, but like upon reflection, you're just like, whoa, I was there for that and I saw that. Um, I guess when you saw it in theaters as a kid, did it strike you as something special? Were you blown away?
I loved it. They were great movies. I remember I bought the novelization of The Empire Strikes Back.
Nice. Uh, the novels are so good.
Yeah, they were.
I've never read a Star Wars novel that I really didn't enjoy.
Yeah, it's a great story.
All right, it's very affectionately referred to as a space opera, and I just find it so profoundly correct. I was like, it is a
Hmm.
space opera. It is.
It's got all the drama, but none of the
Oh,
singing.
right. Oh, imagine musical Star Wars.
I can't believe that someone hasn't done that already. I'm sure that
Right?
exists somewhere.
I'm sure it exists somewhere, and maybe they just didn't get the like proper production support.
Exactly. Some community theater somewhere has done a musical version of Star Wars.
Right? You know what? Maybe it could be like a set thing because I know they had a mildly short successful run of Spider-Man the musical, but I think it ended up closing because the actors playing Spider-Man having to do all these acrobatics and fly around on the stage, I think they kept getting injured.
They did. I remember that quite well.
Yes.
That wasn't a great show, if I remember correctly.
Really? Oh, I heard it wasn't that bad.
There were probably many reasons, but yes, injury was definitely one of them.
Right, very high on the list. Like, maybe we shouldn't have our actors flying 20 feet above the air. Just a thought. Um, excellent, excellent. Oh, so exciting. So if you are ready, I would love to share the scenarios that I sent over to you that I think really encompass big themes around Anakin, particularly coming to a head at this very traumatic time in his storyline. And I'm excited to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay. All right. So we have scenario one that I sent to Eliza. Elisa. See, I threw that Z in there. Knew I was going to do that. Damn. Like,
It's a name that always gets mispronounced. I'm used to it.
Yeah. Oh, know what? As a Christine, we answer to a lot of different versions of the names. There's Christina, there's Kirsten, there's Kristen, there's
Well, it's
the
also Christine
CHs.
K, which I'm sure you get misspelled all the time.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah,
I say Christine, and then I start spelling it, and they've already written the CH, and now they have to cross it out and start over.
that's
It's
right.
par for the course every time. Every time. So getting into scenario one. All right, since Anakin was about 10, 11 years old, he has essentially been groomed by Senator Palpatine, the alias name of the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. From ages 10 to 23, he has worked to grow close to Anakin and gain his trust. Palpatine has told Anakin that he was special, that the authorities around him, the Jedi, don't appreciate how powerful he is. They don't respect his skills as a Jedi warrior, and that he can't trust them. He sees how important praise and recognition are to Anakin's self esteem. Anakin was raised in slavery for the first 10 years of his life, and his reactions to praise were extremely formative at a young age. He has mentally and emotionally guided Anakin to embrace his strong negative feelings of anger and revenge, emotions that users of the Force see as gateways to the dark side. He even convinces Anakin that the Jedi plan to betray the government and need to be stopped. Palpatine does this over the course of years, knowing that one day he will enact his grand plan and christen Anakin as his apprentice in the dark side. Once the transition comes to fruition, Anakin commits terrible acts of violence from the start at Palpatine's command, and will continue to do so across the galaxy for over 20 years until his redemption at the end of Return of the Jedi. So, Elisa, your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because negative feelings of anger and revenge, anger is a feeling, revenge is an action.
Mm.
So he has feelings of anger, and those feelings of anger are justified. Um, so, I mean, my main issue with this whole scenario is that the Jedi don't allow Anakin to express and understand and come to terms with his negative emotions or any emotions. And people need to do that. Um, he had a he had a traumatic childhood being a slave, um, and he needs to process that experience. The feeling of anger that he has is a normal reaction to that trauma, and the only one in his life that is encouraging him to feel that is Palpatine. So it stands to reason that Palpatine would be helping him manage those emotions. Unfortunately, in a negative way, but those emotions are there, and the Jedi encouraging Anakin to ignore and suppress those emotions is not helpful.
No, I definitely see that. I've always taken a lot of issue with the Jedi and just all of the repression. There's a lot of repression that comes with their orthodox religion, essentially is
Mm-hmm.
what it is. Um yeah, no, that you don't get to form attachments. You're not supposed to feel sad or mad, or you're not supposed to feel too much because that will throw off your balance in the force. And I don't know, I guess feelings are like the Jedi gateway drug to the dark side. um
Yeah, I think that's the Jedi's Achilles heel.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. That's a big analyzation that comes up with a reason why like their hubris led to their fall, led to them being vulnerable, to their eventual almost extinction. Was that they thought they knew everything. They thought that their way was the best way, and that anything else would open you up to the dark side and open you up to being unbalanced in the force, and that there was no room for anything else.
It would be interesting to know what the history of the Jedi versus the dark side actually was. What is the reason that the Jedi feel that emotion is a sign of weakness?
That is something I would definitely like to analyze more. There is quite a lot of like lore history around around the history between the Jedi and the Sith, who are essentially the dark side users. But even
Mhm.
that is a it's a loaded thing to say. Um, and I've never delved into that. Like why? I think it's because if I had to go off the top of my head, that the Sith, they kind of deal in absolutes. They're far more motivated by their emotions, by whether it's, I guess, what some people consider to be selfishness. They're very self-motivated in their pursuits, and kind of their idea that like this way is the best way and this is how we're going to achieve peace, and which is not dissimilar to what the Jedi
Yeah,
feel.
I was
It's
going to
just a
say that
very
sounds like you could
different
be
approach.
talking about the Jedi as well.
Yeah. No,
That
there's
this is the way to do it. This is the way to have peace. And notice that neither of these two groups have anything to do with positive emotion. So if the Jedi
right.
are no emotion and the Sith are just like anger, revenge, um, where is love? Where is kindness? Where is empathy?
Yeah.
Neither of these groups allow the full range of human experience.
Yeah. And I think that there's this concept I won't delve into too deeply of the gray Jedi, which I think is kind of a concept that takes out all of the negativity and kind of the absolutism. Um, but that's a conversation for another episode. Um, um, yeah, no, it's very, and it is very true that the encouragement that Palpatine gives isn't inherently negative. It just has negative motivations, being that, oh, I want, like, in the pursuit of my power, I need to manipulate this young man to come over to the side of my teachings and leave behind what he knows. But yes, it's not a bad thing for him to acknowledge that he's angry about what happened with his mother, or that he feels like he's not being heard by the authorities in his life. There's a long-standing issue of Anakin not trusting the Jedi because they initially didn't want him to be trained as a Jedi because he was too old at the time, and they felt that he had. They didn't want to train him as a Jedi because he loved his mom, and they were like, "That's going to be a hindrance. That's going to be something that'll get in your way."
Yeah, and like
Like
I don't
what?
understand that. Why would love for your mother be a hindrance to
Yeah,
to managing the force? I mean, if the force is an extension of life, then acknowledging that life is broad and complex should be part of the skill set required to utilize that power.
right. And they do talk about compassion, and they talk about empathy, and like there are positive emotions that the Jedi do encourage, but it's, I don't know, it's almost steeped in, like, you want to be able to feel love, but you can't like direct that at anyone in particular. It's like,
What is love if it's not directed to people?
right? Yeah, no, it's a very flawed way of looking at things. It's also not helpful for Anakin, who's coming into this organization as an older child. Actually, something that I always find very um unappetizing about the Jedi is, actually, they considered Anakin too old to join the order at age 10, because they usually take children, like force sensitive children, they find them, and not like kidnap them, but they take them like from their families, who give them voluntarily because it's an honor to join the Jedi Order, when they're about 3 or 4 years old. So you find that majority of the Jedi don't remember their families at all. So they don't have those love connections. They don't have the familial tribal connections to whom they were born to, because they were just taken so young. And it's almost like part of the Jedi process. That it's like, oh, you have to come when you're young so that you can kind of like forget your family and really be indoctrinated into what we're teaching you.
Yeah, but that in and of itself is a trauma.
Right?
I mean,
100%.
these are assuming that the different, uh, I mean, it's not all humans, right?
Correct.
So,
Yeah,
like
there
in
are.
that universe, do non-human beings need care and love from, I'm going to say parents, but it doesn't need to be parents. It needs to be adult figures who provide care and teaching and love and safety and basic elements of life like food and shelter. Uh, Assuming all of those different races require those things, you're raising an entire generation of traumatized children who never received what is just a basic need as a young child.
Yeah. It's almost like you raise them in almost like this mental state of dissociation.
Yeah,
Like you just kind of like, yes, they're and the younglings and Padawans are well cared for. They live at the Jedi Temple. They're raised in the ways of the Jedi, essentially with their new family. Essentially, with their new family, you grow up with these other kids, and you grow up with these teachers who teach you their ways of right and wrong, and all of that. But I guess that element of dissociation, like, okay, you have to focus on your relationship with the Force and your levels of compassion for other people and what that means, but no love.
I'm
No
curious.
love.
Are there any Jedi trainees that ever decide that this isn't the life for them?
There's a few stories of Padawans who are essentially like Jedi apprentices. So you're a youngling, like you're a child being raised in the temple, and then eventually a older Jedi will take you on as their apprentice, and that's where you really learn how to be a Jedi Knight. And there are a few who have left. So the most famous one is actually Anakin Skywalker's Padawan, Ahsoka Tano, who is a very popular character in the franchise. Um, she's probably the most notable character that walked away from the Jedi Order. She was basically framed. She was falsely accused of a terrorist bombing, and she was arrested, and then she escaped and went on the run to prove her innocence. And in the end, Anakin ended up finding the person who framed her and exposed the conspiracy. And the Jedi Council, who are basically the leaders of the Jedi, who had essentially written her off, said like, well, all this evidence says that you're guilty, so you're expelled from the Jedi Order and you're going to go on trial with the Senate, and all that's going to happen. In the end, they have to acknowledge that they were wrong, and they apologize in kind of this half-assed way and say like, well, we would love to welcome you back into the Jedi Order and like come back to your life that you've been living for the past, I think she was maybe 16 when that happened. um and she says no, and she walks away from the order, and she walks away from Anakin, which is another huge point of trauma for him. Because next to his wife, who's a secret wife that no one can really know is his wife, his Padawan, his trainee, is essentially like his little sister and probably the second closest person to him. And so when she walks away from the Jedi Order and walks away from him, it's a huge trauma for him.
Mm. She walks
And
away from him on a personal level, not just on a professional level.
well, it's she goes on to not see him for a long time. Maybe like a year or so passes before they see each other again. And it's this whole very heartfelt exchange that they have where he tries to beg her to stay, and she's like, I have to go find out who I am without the Jedi.
Mm.
Like, I have to go explore this. Like, I was basically ridden off, and I have to go find out like what this all means. And he took it very personally. Anakin takes a lot of things very personally, and he understood. He's because at this point he would have been 22 years old, so he's had his questions and his doubts about the Jedi Order for years now, mostly instigated by Palpatine and just a lack of support for his emotions. And he's never felt really supported or 100% safe within the guidance of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was just, there were many nails in the coffin in Anakin's final days, but definitely Ahsoka's, the council betraying Ahsoka and then her leaving was a big one.
Yeah.
That was a big one.
Well, one of the notes I wrote kind of piggybacks on that. What did Anakin want? You know, his decision, things that happen to him are made by those decisions are made by other people. They're made by Palpatine. They're made by the Jedi. But and the Jedi just kind of took him away from his mom. You know, as a young adult or even as a teenager, he never was really in a position to decide what he wanted and to fully explore who he could be as an individual.
Yeah. And I think there was so many contradictions to what he wanted, because on one hand he chose to be a Jedi. He chose to leave his mother at 10 years old. He had the autonomy to make this choice to leave with the Jedi Qui-Gon Jinn, who found him on his home planet. And he was very excited. I think he then was very torn to leave his mother. So there's that contradiction of, I want to go be a Jedi and I want to be powerful and have autonomy and not be stuck in this life of slavery and servitude. And I want to go make something of my life. But I also don't want to leave my mother. But like, do I have to do what I have to do? Which is a very big decision to make at 10. Um, and then, of course, as he gets older, he then falls in love with his wife. And the Jedi aren't supposed to have attachments, certainly not supposed to get married, but he does that anyway and is like, okay, now I want to make a family. Like, now I want to be with my wife and we're gonna have this baby and I'm so happy, but I'm so conflicted because it has to be a secret. Like, why does pretty much all the things that he wants all contradict with each other? And there's just no, he's very out of balance
Yeah,
for somebody whose whole existence really stems upon being in balance with the force. He's a very out of balance person.
right. But the problem is what he's out of balance with are all normal human needs.
Yeah.
And he's not living a life that allows him to have these normal human needs.
Yeah. And then I think also it's like he has these normal human needs, but then he also has, I think because he's not assessing the needs, then he's able to really act out. Like, his traumas really aren't assessed, so he acts out in these violent acts of rage because he can't regulate his emotions, and he has these great powers in which to act out.
Right.
And so then it becomes even more imperative that he finds some sort of like emotional balance that he's just not getting.
Well, he's looking for balance in unhealthy ways. He hasn't learned any healthy coping mechanisms.
Exactly. 100%. Um because he can't, because I think he can't go to one source for everything. It's almost like he's torn in between two places. Like, he can go to support from his wife, but she's only going to understand to a certain extent, and then he can go to the Jedi for support, but he can only tell them everything to a certain extent. And I think that's also what makes him very vulnerable to Palpatine's intentions. And that Palpatine's watching all of this, and he knows everything that's going on. He knows everything that's going on, not because Anakin tells him, but because the Sith are very plugged in. They know what's going on, they know their grand plan, and they know everyone that they're manipulating to get there. And so he knows about the secret marriage to Padme, even though no one has told him. He knows about Anakin's doubts with the Jedi because he's been planting that seed for years. And I think this is what really motivated me to discuss this scenario, was really the psychological effects of grooming and what that must have done to Anakin over the years, just from all these unstable places being so vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. I think you mentioned accountability. And if Anakin is accountable for his actions because of all the grooming that was involved. But I mean, in my opinion, we're all accountable for our own actions, regardless of our past experiences. Trauma has a detrimental effect on how we manage life's challenges, but human beings have a remarkable ability for resilience and growth. There's this term, neuroplasticity, which means that the brain continues to grow and evolve with life's experiences. So that means it's possible to change the dysfunctional thinking patterns to develop more healthy behaviors. So, so yes, I think Anakin is accountable for his choices. He just never got any of the tools of coping that you need to get throughout your formative years on how to deal with sadness and loss and frustration and anger. So all he knows how to do is to lash out.
Yeah. And I think that his lashing out gets frequently put aside, which I think is a big issue, whether it's slaughtering the villagers after his mother died, or acting out at an enemy, or having particularly, like, he'll be in a battle and have particularly violent inclinations. And I think whether it's the characters in the story, or even the watchers, even the fans observing this, I find that Anakin gets excused a lot for his behavior. It gets blamed on his trauma. It gets blamed on Palpatine. It gets blamed on the Jedi. And it's like, at the end of the day, like, Anakin can make his own choices.
Yes,
Like, he's still a person. Like, is he a very sad, tragic character? Of course. But at any point, he could instead choose to focus on the positive things in his life and realize that, you know what, I need to seek out help. I'm not doing what I need to do in order to move forward with my life. I need to make some hard choices.
right, right. And it's interesting because you wonder if he thinks to himself, "I'm unhappy. Uh, I'm not. I'm not acting in a way that is working for me." That somehow would be a statement against the Jedi, who he's supposed to be grateful for, be in awe of, want to become. It's a response to their lack of being able to bring him up in a way to make him a complete human being.
Yeah. There's also this other aspect, which I think is, I always look at Star Wars heavily from, like, a religious aspect, which I
Mm.
think is very interesting. And I forgot to mention this in the scenario, but something very important about Anakin is that he also is considered to be the culmination of this prophecy of the chosen one. So the chosen one is born to bring balance to the Force, to defeat the Sith and bring balance to the Force, to defeat the dark side,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. And so the Jedi that finds him, Qui-Gon Jinn, believes that this child is the prophecy. And so Anakin, as a result, he's a very powerful Jedi. Like, he's more powerful than essentially everybody, which is debatable, but he has these extraordinary powers, is a very talented warrior, very strong. And I think because they're kind of waiting to see, like, is he going to be the culmination of this? I think a lot of his behavior gets excused. And for me, it's just like, okay, so he's space Jesus. And so a lot of his behavior is just like, there's a lot going on. Is he going to bring balance to the Force? I don't know, but he might. So I guess it's fine. Like, or he gets like a finger wagging from
It's like,
Obi-Wan.
chosen ones will be chosen ones.
Right? Exactly. And so much of his behavior gets put to the side. Like, he'll occasionally get reprimanded for something, but not really face any consequences for what happens. until I guess he faces really the ultimate consequence. But then even at Return of the Jedi, at the end of what would it be, the episode 6 film, which came out as the third film, which non-Star Wars fans always have a good time with.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Yep.
like he has this huge redemption at the end, which I guess I get, because it's all, I guess that's, some people say that's the culmination of the prophecy, is he has his son Luke and he wants to save him from being taken by the emperor, so he kills the emperor, and they say that's him bringing balance to the force, and then has this whole redemption where he and his son unite, and then he dies, and people are like, oh, this is his redemption arc, he came back from the dark, and his love for his son brought him back. And I'm like, yeah, but hasn't he been like this, like, warlord for the past 20 plus years, just blowing up planets and murdering a lot of people
Yeah,
and
it's
just
like kind of
rampaging?
tied
And
up
I'm
with a
like,
bow, and in a way
right,
that is not quite realistic.
exactly. At the end of the movie, I was like, oh, so it's just good now? Like, no longer, like, he's no longer Darth Vader and everything's fine. It's and it's interesting, and eventually I will do a story arc, a trilogy arc episode series on Darth Vader, who is, I consider to be a separate character, um in a way, because I almost wonder if through all of this trauma and all of this repression, if when Anakin does fall to the dark side, quote unquote, if he actually experiences like a psychotic break where he's
Mm.
like, I have pent everything up for so long, and I don't know what to do about my wife and my feelings against the Jedi. And I have this figure in my ear who's telling me all of these things and telling me about the power that I need to save my wife, who I think is going to die. And there's so much going on that once he essentially is culpable in the murder of one of the Jedi Council, Mace Windu, that he just breaks, has psychotic break, is just completely vulnerable to the manipulations of Palpatine, and is like, okay, he says I'm Darth Vader now, I'm Darth Vader now, and another personality essentially takes over.
Well, also, Palpatine has all these powers of the dark side. Is it possible that it's some sort of like dark side magic that changes Anakin in a way that's beyond a psychotic break or beyond just making a conscious decision to be uh, on the dark side, but something magical that's done to him from Palpatine to change him into somebody else?
That's possible. There's a lot of discussion around if Anakin and Vader are the same person.
Really?
It's a lot of very interesting discussion, because is it a multiple personality thing? Does the dark side take you over like a spirit or some sort of like manipulative energy, or is it a conscious decision to follow a different line of orthodox teaching? It's a lot to unpack, and I look forward to those episodes and really getting into some of the psychological studies that have, or maybe not studies, some of the psychological analysis that has been done, which is very fascinating when you get into the academic sides of Star Wars. That's been a
Well,
pretty fun journey.
and also, from a purely practical narrative standpoint, the end of this story was written long before the beginning of this story.
Yes,
So, who's to say how much was actually thought of in the beginning in terms of Vader's background? All of that was
exactly.
built after the fact. So, there
Right?
are definitely going to be parts that don't fit entirely.
Exactly. The Star Wars is a huge retconning job.
Yeah.
And Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni are doing a absolutely magical job at doing so. No, it's a lot of retconning. Just kind of filtering back of like, okay, well, this happened, so we're gonna write this thing that happened before to make it make a little bit more sense for the
Yeah.
story that we want to tell afterwards.
Right, right.
um and yeah, no, it makes for a lot of interesting points, because yes, what was, and who knows, maybe one day I'll talk to George Lucas about this and find out the answer of
There
what,
might not be an answer.
there might not be an answer. And that's the thing about fiction. Sometimes there's plot holes.
And then also, those potholes give fans the space to come up with ideas.
Yes, absolutely. And that's really what the novelizations are. It's things like fan fiction, and I think that's the beautiful thing about examining ourselves through the lens of fiction is then you can kind of run with it and you can take from it what you need to take from it. What works for you in this form of escapism.
Yes, and you can use it as a jumping off point for your own imagination.
Yeah. So I think that leaves us with very few answers for Anakin, but many fun questions for us.
Well, my answer for Anakin is he should have been in therapy early on
Yes.
to deal with
100.
all of this trauma and what he wants out of his life. And that was not an option
Yes.
for him.
This is not an option for him. There's a great series of memes that always go around the internet of it's like if one little thing changed or like one little thing was exposed or Anakin was given advice in some little thing in the beginning before he became Vader, it would have just stopped the whole storyline. Like, oh, Palpatine's actually the Sith Lord Darth Sidious? Oh, I'm not going to listen to him. Or just my favorite one is a conversation between him and Padme where she says, "Hey, you don't have to be a Jedi anymore. I'm a rich senator and have a very large inheritance on my planet. Just leave the Jedi Order and we'll just go back to Naboo and like live a great life and you don't have to do anything." And he's like, "That sounds great." And it's like the next shot is end of movie. End of Star Wars. Yeah.
I love that. I think
Yeah.
he's much happier not being a Jedi.
I think he'd be much happier,
All
right?
the things that really made him happy, he had to walk away from.
Right. No, I think it's funny. I have this thought about your experience in the music industry that I can imagine the amount of artists who worked so hard to get what they thought they wanted and then turns out in the end when they didn't get it or when they walked away from what they thought they needed, they ended up being much happier with what they found instead.
That is huge. It can take a tremendous amount of bravery to walk away from something that you've thought you always wanted and that society tells you is what you want. Uh, and sometimes what's best for you is to walk away.
Yeah. You know, it's hard to let go of our dreams, especially if you get so close or you've worked so hard and then to realize that, oh, I can change my mind. My dream can change, my goals can
Absolutely.
change.
When dreams change, it can be really hard to come to terms with.
Yeah. Cuz it's almost like a loss. It's a loss of who you thought you'd be.
Yes, but at the same time, you're gaining who the new you is.
Yes.
People change throughout their lives in a myriad of ways. And what you want out of life changes, it's natural.
Mhm.
And so many people stay unhappy because they never acknowledge that things have changed and that it might be time to do something differently.
Yes. Like I think there's an unhealthy factor in never changing. Like you're supposed to change. You're supposed to
Absolutely.
develop as a person. Like if you're exactly the same as you were 15 years ago, you should assess that.
Yes. And it's smart to reassess where you're at in life on a regular basis. Is this
Yeah.
where I want to be? Is this the same direction I'm happy with? Sometimes the answer will be yes. Sometimes the answer is I'm not ready to say goodbye to this yet. I'm going to keep pushing. And maybe that's the right decision there. But in another 10 years, maybe that decision has changed.
Yeah. And I feel like it's so easy for people to get stuck. Like cuz change is scary. Change can be inherently scary, but I think that's also what makes it so wonderful. Like if what is it they say? Like if something doesn't scare you a little bit, then maybe it shouldn't be what you do.
Right. And in Anakin's case, maybe the conversation should have been, hey, Jedi guys, thank you for getting me out of slavery. I'm doing much better now, but look, I've met a girl. I want to get married and settle down. I want to get my mom and have her live with us in my wife's big castle.
Right.
So take care. It's been real. And I'm out of here.
Yeah, like I'm probably gonna walk away from this.
Yeah.
Sorry guys. Yeah, no, maybe that would have been best for him. Or maybe he could have brought all of these things to the Jedi's attention and maybe they would have reflected how they needed to change.
Yeah.
Which I think is something that the characters who survive the annihilation of the Jedi reflect on later. Like they have Yoda's character reflect on this, and Obi-Wan's character in later parts of the grander story reflect on the mistakes they made and how their hubris really led to their downfall. That it was like we were so stubborn on so many things and we weren't willing to change, and look where it's led us.
Yes.
Because hindsight is 2020, as they say.
It's funny because they talk about balancing the force, but they don't really have any balance in themselves.
Yeah. They think because they're so zen all the time that that's balance, but
Yes.
not necessarily.
No. That, I mean, is their zen the removal of emotion or the suppression of emotion? I mean, emotion is there whether they wish to acknowledge it or not. I can't believe that all of the Jedi have just abolished feeling anything.
Yeah, it's but you know what's and I think what I enjoy so much about um things like the television shows and the novels and the comic books that really dive deeper into the character development is that kind of like real people, you find out that all the Jedi are feeling things, that they all have these different lines of experiences and they just suppress it all because it's not the Jedi way. Like you find out that Obi-Wan had deep feelings for a who is it? Satine, who is a duchess on the planet Mandalore. You find out he had feelings for her when they were young and he suppressed those. You learn more about Mace Windu and how he can be very untrustworthy but has like deep loyalties to different people based on his experiences. And just the more you learn about even like more minor characters, the more you're like, oh, you were all in the same boat, but the rules said you don't talk about Fight Club. So
Mm. And
so we're just not gonna acknowledge it.
I wonder if that elicited resentment for Anakin for not suppressing these emotions.
Maybe. I wonder if there was some jealousy of I wish I could express what I feel. I wish I could I mean, I don't think anyone wants to have outbursts, but I wish that I felt more grounded in the things that I feel,
Mm-hmm.
which I think Anakin could have felt more grounded if he wasn't always being told to suppress them.
Right.
Um, but no, I do think that's a line of thought that's very interesting. And I think that's an excellent segue as far as Anakin's unhealthy feeling suppressions into scenario two.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so Anakin is separated from his mother at age 9 when he leaves their home and joins the Jedi Order. He doesn't see her again until he's 19, and she dies very shortly after, under painful, violent circumstances. Anakin immediately reacts by murdering the native people of the village where he found her held captive. It can't be ignored that they did kidnap and torture her, but still. He is strongly conflicted by his actions. He knows that it was wrong to murder the villagers. It's not the Jedi way. But he's so sad and he's so angry. He's filled with regret about not coming back to his mother sooner and not being able to save her in the end. Once Anakin is an adult, age 23, he is in a secret marriage to Senator Padme Amidala, and they're expecting their first child. He begins to have visions that she is going to die in childbirth and decides that the only way to save her is through becoming more powerful in the Force. In time, he is falsely told by Palpatine, Darth Sidious, that he can teach Anakin this power through the dark side. Though Anakin is suspicious and knows that embracing the dark side is wrong, his decision making is clouded by his desire to not lose his wife like he lost his mom. This powerful desire leads him to betraying the Jedi to save Palpatine's life when it is endangered, which sets off a chain of events that changes the fate of the galaxy. So essentially, Anakin doesn't deal with loss very well.
No.
And I think it really continues on the themes that we were already discussing. But what are your particular thoughts about, I guess, this line of unhealthy behavior with loss coping?
Well, it seems to me that this is kind of like a PTSD response, where he's going through the trauma of losing his mom, killing all the villagers, which was a traumatic event for him, as well as the death of his mother. And this concept of visions of his wife dying. I mean, in my mind, from a mental health standpoint, it's like his mind is constantly on edge, waiting for danger. And he sees that danger as the death of a loved one. And now he's seeing that danger in the impending death of his wife. Like your brain is always preparing to protect itself from what the next trauma is going to be, because he's never really dealt with the trauma that he experienced with his mom and the villagers that he killed. So I think he's just reliving this trauma by having what he's calling visions
Yeah.
of Padme's death.
Yeah. And actually it makes me think of a point I forgot to include in this scenario. So the Jedi that found Anakin on his home planet Tatooine, Qui-Gon Jinn, he's the one who essentially freed him from slavery. He ensured his freedom and said, I want to bring you to the Jedi Order. I think you're special and I think you're powerful and I want you to come with me and I will train you to be a Jedi. And this is essentially his first father figure. It's his first paternal figure who praised him and who believed in him, freed him from slavery, like essentially made a deal that ensured his freedom. And Anakin grew attached to him very quickly for very good reason. He was a very, very affectionate figure very quickly. And he dies quite shortly after Anakin meets him. And and then Anakin is still brought into the Jedi Order and trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi. And in the comic books, there are scenarios where Anakin will like sleep like on the floor next to Obi-Wan's bed and is always scared that he's also going to lose him. And so he, even as a child, he was having these trauma reactions of like, I can't lose somebody else. Like I can't lose you. I can't lose Obi-Wan like I lost Qui-Gon. And so even and so like there's the female figures in his life. There's his mother who he loses, and then later for fear of losing his wife. But it also does flow over into the paternal figures in his life, and he shows those real signs of PTSD, like those real trauma reactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the people that he feels safe with, he loses. And then he doesn't get to deal with the trauma that comes from that loss. And he doesn't know how to move forward.
Yeah, yeah. No, he doesn't get to because of the teachings of the Jedi. He doesn't really get to almost doesn't get to mourn them the way that he really needs to. He doesn't get to work through those feelings because loss is it's a multi-step process. It's really feeling all of the feelings that you feel, whether it's sadness or grief or regret or anger. It's almost like a 12-step program.
Yes, and it can go on a very long time and take an entirely mysterious path. It's not like you feel terrible in the beginning and then it gradually gets better.
Yeah.
Sometimes it gets better, sometimes it gets worse. It can take years to process. And the Jedi don't give you the tools or the space or the freedom to experience that.
Yeah.
And that, loss is something that everybody has to deal with throughout their lives. And there's no avoiding that. It's not like if he develops enough Jedi skills, he's going to be able to not have loss. He and all the Jedi need to learn to live with sadness and loss and learn skills to manage those. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you make poor choices. And that's exactly what Anakin did.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It's probably, I mean, I'm sure it's one of many things that the Sith and the Jedi actually kind of agree on, even though they'd never admit it. Because a big, probably the main motivation of Palpatine, as well as his master Darth Plagueis, their main motivation for everything that they do, for the entire grand plan, for the wars and the lives that they destroy, and all of the political intrigue and manipulations, their goal is to figure out how to live forever. So that was Darth Plagueis's goal. All of his motivations were trying to make it so that he never dies. And then eventually Palpatine kills him. And then Palpatine's entire goal throughout the entire Star Wars storyline, from old days to new storyline, is he is trying to figure out how to clone his own body, essentially had to clone himself and transfer his consciousness from like one form to another so that he can live forever.
Well,
So
the idea is that he clones himself into a new body, and that body ages, and before that body dies, he clones himself into another body.
kind of it's what he's trying to do. There's a lot of iterations of him not doing this successfully. Um, but like essentially, like I was just watching one of the sequel movies last night. I was watching The Rise of Skywalker, and that's essentially what it culminates to, with Rey, the main character in the sequel films, is that she's essentially the daughter of a clone, like an attempt to clone himself. Like that clone escaped and then like went on to have a life, had a daughter, and so he then like lures Rey to him, essentially so she can kill him and his essence can transfer into her and he can continue to live on. Like that's, so it's almost like another roundabout way of, you can't really deal with loss, or you can't accept your own mortality, which I think is kind of another way to, I guess, view not being able to deal with the loss of oneself
Right. Well,
in
yeah,
this.
fear of death is a pretty universal experience.
Yeah. And the Sith were having none of it. They were like, we don't want to do this. We can't handle it. um
But I'm confused about that, because if he could just transfer his consciousness into somebody else, why did it have to be her?
I think that's a very loaded question. I'm sure it has something to do maybe with the DNA, or maybe with the midichlorians, which are like essentially kind of the building blocks of life, kind of like cells.
Right, right,
Except they have their own kind of sense of behavior.
right.
And that's something that was touched on slightly, very lightly in the movies and then kind of died off, but it's a much more solidified theme in the novels. That the midichlorians can be, that they're living entities, that they can be manipulated, that they can be coerced, that they could be, essentially they can make their own decisions, whether they're going
They're
to
their
do
own
something or not do
separate
something.
little beings that live inside of you.
Yes,
So he would need someone with midichlorians in order to accept his consciousness.
I believe so. I think
Hmm.
that's how they are working it out. It's more part of the retconning. It's,
Okay, okay.
so hopefully we have more solid answers to that as time goes on. If anyone wants to shoot me an email if they know more details about that, I would love to learn. We're always here to learn at Mind the Force. Um, but it's always such a, it, I mean, it goes back to what we talked about before, that it's such a roundabout way that we're all really experiencing the same fears of loss and regret and guilt and grief, and I guess we're just expressing it in different ways. So Anakin wanted to learn this power to save his wife, really not even so much for himself, but to learn how to save his wife so he doesn't have to experience the same feelings as when he lost his mom. while Palpatine wants the power for inherently more selfish reasons, but because he doesn't want to experience the loss of his own life.
Mm-hmm. Fear is also something that the Sith encourage uh, in their group, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Because I think it's interesting that the Jedi don't seem to be afraid of death,
That is correct.
but the Sith are. But also, the Jedi seem to live beyond death because they come back in some form.
I believe they covered this in the Clone Wars the animated series
Mm.
cuz Yoda goes on a particular journey, I believe it's the end of season 6. He goes on a very particular journey to learn how to harness his essence after death. It's pretty much so that he can come back and help future generations of Jedi through like the story that will continue. Um so whether it's coming back to help Ahsoka or guide Ezra or pretty much like harness his essence and become a force ghost.
Right, but
As
he doesn't need
people.
a body to do that. It seems like the Sith need an actual corporal body.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting the essences that live on after death between the Jedi and the Sith, because the Jedi seem to, I guess, have more of a lock on it, while the Sith, I guess, the examples I've seen in different sources is they're almost trapped in certain places that are very strong with like dark side energy. While the Force ghosts of the Jedi who are able to harness their essence after death and become part of the cosmic force. Ooh, I remembered a good
Yeah.
lore word. Yes. So there's the living force, um, and then there's the cosmic force that you become part of after your death, and you kind of go back out into the universe.
Are those actually different?
Yes, the living force and the cosmic force are different. Um, I cannot speak to that difference off the top of my head, which I am sure someone will drag me for later.
That
Um,
actually, I don't like that idea. I would
mm,
prefer they be the same thing because when you die, you become part of the physical world in a different form.
right? Like
And
your energy just changes form.
yeah, and it becomes part of the living world uh, through the molecules that made you you. So, don't you become part of the living world, the living force after you die?
Mm.
I don't know. That's just my. If I was writing it, that's what I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, no, I definitely see the mindset there. And that would make sense.
I also
I'm
love
now
the idea of the force being not only part of the living world, but also part of the world of all that came before us.
right? Like we're all I mean, isn't that the concept of even our reality that we're all just made of stardust?
Yes, absolutely. All the matter is still there. It's just in a different form.
Yeah. And see I love that. Some people say that it's more spirituality, but I'm like there's science backing that up.
Absolutely.
Like I'm a very sciencey person. And
But
so
science can be spiritual as well.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's a belief system.
Hmm.
It's a belief. And whatever that belief is grounded in is our human choice to make.
Yes.
Um I suppose any more thoughts as far as Anakin, cuz in the end he is not able to save his wife. She dies for many reasons. She does die in childbirth. Some that say that she died of a broken heart. As she knew that Anakin fell to the dark side. It could also be complications of, asphyxiation, being force choked before she shortly went into labor. It could
Well,
also,
if I remember correctly, wasn't she in some terrible place when she was giving birth?
um,
Where was she? Was she at home? Was she in a hospital?
I believe she was on like a hospital ship. I don't recall what planet she was on, but She went to Mustafar and like confronted Anakin about what Obi-Wan told her about him killing younglings and falling to the dark side. Um and he tried to convince her that wasn't the case, that he was going to become more powerful and he could save her. And then he felt that she was betraying him because she brought Obi-Wan with him. Then he proceeded to force choke her, and then she collapsed onto the floor. And then by the time Obi-Wan brought her, like he dueled Anakin, cut a bunch of his limbs off, and left him for dead on the lava beach.
Right, Lava Beach.
And then by the time Obi-Wan got her like to the medical droids, I don't think they were on the ship anymore. I think they were somewhere proper. I don't know if they were on a ship or a physical planet. Likely Coruscant if they got back to Coruscant, which is the main capital planet. Um, but yeah, no, she does. She gives birth in a pretty safe place.
But
She actually,
suffice it to say that the events leading up to her birth were extremely stressful.
yes, very stressful. Her blood pressure must have been through the roof.
Right. So, and she's having twins, which is, a more complicated birth process. Uh, I think this is kind of one of those self-fulfilling prophecies.
Right? Like he
Anakin,
in the end caused
yeah,
it.
Anakin's behavior and Padme's having to deal with all that stuff probably didn't help uh, the physical situation in which she gave birth. So if
Yeah.
things had been calmer and he had been chill and by her side and prepared, the chances of her dying probably would have been less.
Yeah. More than likely. Like there's also other theories that Palpatine manipulated something in order to cause her death, but I don't think there's any lore that really substantiates that. It's more fan theory.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if
Um,
Palpatine would have had to get all that involved because Anakin was already so on edge.
exactly. Like he was like, I've done all my work. I've pretty much thrown this young man into an emotional tornado. He'll take care of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And he'll throw his wife into an emotional tornado, and
Yeah.
then she'll have to give birth to twins.
Exactly. So I don't know if Palpatine planned for him to for Padme to die. But it certainly was convenient for his plan because as you're manipulating somebody, isolation is the key.
Yes.
So it's like
Yes.
we're gonna take away everyone and everything that you love, so that you're just gonna be splayed open
Right.
for
Yeah.
me
If
to
Padme
do
had
whatever I want.
lived, I don't know that Anakin would have made those same decisions.
Right? I don't know. Like he probably, if she'd lived, I mean, maybe if she had been there to stop Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting, maybe he wouldn't have lost his limbs and needed to be in the Vader suit. I mean, granted, he didn't need to be in the Vader suit. Palpatine kept him in that to torture him. Um, but he wouldn't have needed like all the cyber upgrades, like because he wouldn't have lost his limbs like that.
Right. Right.
So it probably would have been quite different. Like maybe she would have, because she still would have been a senator in whatever new empire government that Emperor Palpatine was launching. And she also still would have been like a member of the rebellion. I wonder how that would have meshed with like her having probably secret rebellion inclinations while Anakin is like serving the Emperor. I mean, would she have died another way?
Right.
Like,
Right. Sure.
all right, a whole lot of what if.
Right.
Whole lot of what if. But alas, that is not the fate that
Nope.
that Anakin would fall to. He would lose his wife. He would have twins that he would not go on to know about for many years, and would essentially continue his traumatic rampaging across the galaxy for the next 2 decades or so. Tragic. Tragic stuff. um Elisa, I had so much fun today.
Oh, me too.
Oh my gosh. I know that you've only watched the films. I hope maybe this will encourage you to maybe go watch some more Star Wars content.
Yeah. it's been a while since I've watched any Star Wars, and I was like, well, I haven't talked about Star Wars this much in a long time.
Well, good. That's what Mind the Force is trying to do. We're trying to bring the conversation and all of these feelings and experiences to the forefront of your mind.
Yes, it's there. It's there right now.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today. If you could, just a little shameless plug, where can people find you?
Oh, I am on Psychology Today. You can just look me up there, and I take clients in person and remote who are from New York State.
Fabulous. Fantastic. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Hope it's nice and relaxing.
Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, we'll talk very soon.
Thanks so much, Christine.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Well, now I'm experiencing a sense of loss. It's done. Anakin is fried chicken, laying on the lava beach, all sad and alone and crispy. And that brings us to the close of our Anakin Skywalker trilogy arc. And what a journey it has been. I think we can all agree that there's a lot to be learned from Anakin's triumphs and failures. We learned the importance of developing healthy coping mechanisms, the importance of facing our feelings of guilt and loss and anger, and not letting ourselves push these feelings down or dissociating from them, and the importance of being honest with oneself. If you're not happy, admit it to yourself. If you're not satisfied and what you're doing isn't working for you, admit it to yourself. Maybe you won't find yourself in Anakin's lost, emotionally repressed shoes. I want to thank Elisa for her time and for sharing her very deep insight on Anakin's final days, as well as his bigger journey, and how the powers that be really let him down along the way, without excusing him of his own autonomy and responsibility. I personally feel that's an important line to hold with Anakin and characters like him. I think as humans, even in moments of redemption or change, we should never forget that our actions and choices have consequences, and life will come full circle for us all, whether the Force likes it or not. But before I get too soapboxy, if you are interested in Elisa's practice and find yourself in need of some excellent professional guidance, you can find her at Soul Mental Health near Union Square in New York City, or at soulmentalhealth.com/providers/Elisa Paymore. And I'll drop the link in the episode details, of course. So, what do you think about Anakin's fall to the dark side? Who's to blame, if anyone? Share your thoughts with me at mindtheforcepodcast@gmail.com. And as always, please don't forget to follow up on all socials and check us out on your favorite pod streaming platforms. If you like what you hear, do us a huge solid and drop us 5 stars. It really makes a big difference, and I value my lovely listeners very much. Now, on the next episode of Mind the Force, we will find ourselves with a whole new character and a whole new set of traumas to explore. I'm excited to welcome a new co host and a new mental health professional and dive deep into another beloved citizen of a galaxy far, far away. We are full steam ahead, people, and I can't wait to show you where we venture next. I'm Christine McPartlin, and that concludes this episode of Mind the Force. See you next time, and stay mindful.